My name is Ann Dolin, and today we're talking about speaking up for yourself, teaching kids the power of self-advocacy and, in turn, academic success. I'm so excited today because I have my good friend Allison Sibley with me. Allison is so accomplished. She's a psychotherapist. She's the director of the Sibley Group, and she works with children, adolescents, adults, couples, and families. And this is a very exciting news, but she's always had an office in Chevy Chase, DC. But next month, or in April, she's opening up a brand new location on Capitol Hill in DC. So Allison, thank you so much for lending your expertise to us today.
Yeah, and thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to it.
Terrific. You know, what I love about Allison and knowing her all these years is not only can she make the most difficult situations seem easy, she's always calm when it comes to working with kids. And today our topic is a little bit different than diffusing tension or anxiety, but it is one that is just as important. So let's start out by talking about the issue. You know, what is the issue, Allison, when it comes to self-advocacy? What are kids so afraid of?
I've worked with kids for 25 years now in a therapy setting and in lots of different settings. I think kids sometimes don't understand what self-advocacy is. And they also are at different places in their development. And so that plays out in how they ask or get help.
I would totally agree with that. And you're right. Some kids are ready. You know, they have the self-confidence to put themselves out there and raise their hand or respond on an online platform to teachers, but others just aren't quite there. So when it comes to self-advocacy, Allison, can you tell us, what does this mean in the first place and why is it important?
Yeah, I think most people define self-advocacy as speaking up for yourself in order to get help. I really see it and teach it beyond that. I think self-advocacy is learning how to help yourself in a lot of different ways. And it's really important for kids to understand that the ticket to freedom, which all kids want more freedom and independence as they're growing up, is through communication. And communication can take a lot of different forms. It could be speaking up, but it also could be, you know, doing a sidebar, ask for help, or it could be knowing that you need to take a break when you're in the middle of something stressful. So there's a lot of different ways that kids can self-advocate for themselves. Sometimes it's speaking up, and sometimes it's thinking outside of the box about what they need in that moment.
That's a great point, Allison, in that it can come in different forms. When we work with kids on this issue, always around academics, one thing we found is that kids don't know how to ask for help in a formal sense, like through writing and sending an email. And we found that because they haven't had practice doing it and they're so afraid that they'll be rejected or that they won't get a response, they don't do it in the first place. And they're not always sure what to say in an email. So we developed this template for them, and I love this. I'd love to get your take on it too. So I'll show you the template and then an actual email. But this kind of gives kids a framework so they don't have to think about what to say. They just kind of can fill in the blanks. And parents out there, you're welcome to use this. So it's dear teacher's name. Good morning. Include some type of greeting. I'm writing to you about, so then you're going to explain the issue that you're having and probably just as importantly, what you've done to already help yourself. And then please let me know what the next step is. And you can also tell what you've done in addition. And then lastly is a closing. Thank you for your time, and I'll see you in class today, tomorrow, whenever it might be, in your name. So here's what a final one looks like. Dear Mrs. Smith, good morning. I am writing to you about my essay on democracy. When I log into Schoology, it shows as submitted. However, it has now been more than 2 weeks and there is no grade associated with this assignment. Please let me know if something is missing or if you need me to resubmit my essay. Thanks for your time, and I'll see you in class this afternoon. Mary. And what we found is that when kids do have a template like this, they're willing to do it. But if it comes from their own imagination almost, and if they have to write it from scratch, it's really hard for them to do. Allison, have you found that too, that sometimes kids just need a little bit of a nudge in the right direction?
I think this is great. I think they need prompting, and a lot of times they need prompting from people other than their parents. And I have a perfect example, actually. Two of my kids have been customers of Ann's tutors, and one in particular asked for tutoring this summer to work on some things for the fall, and ended up getting help from one of the tutors at Educational Connection. And this was something that they worked on, actually, how you communicate with your teacher when you're confused, or if you have a late assignment or whatever. And it was so nice that it was coming from someone other than me. Because even though I'm a therapist and help kids with self-advocating in my office, it's different when they're your children, right? You have the mom hat on, or the dad hat on.
So true. I've found the same thing with my own kids, that although some things I couldn't help them with, like calculus, but some things I could help them with, but they always responded better to somebody else, even though I do this for a living. I guess it's kind of human nature.
Absolutely.
So Allison, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about how we encourage our kids to speak up in the first place. What are some steps around this?
Yeah, I think, I talk with kids about thinking of self-advocacy as ways of giving themselves help, or getting help. And that can be in a lot of different forms. And I also, as parents, I think it's good for us parents and or educators or adults working with kids. I think it's important to think about the times, how to help our kids feel more secure to do that. And anytime there's a new situation or a new problem or a stress, it's normal for any of us when we feel uncertain to struggle to speak up or ask for help. And some of us more than others. I mean, I'm sure some of you have kids. My daughter, for instance, was like this, where she just wanted to know it already. She didn't want to have to ask for help when she was younger. And that's a skill she's having to learn, right? So I work with kids and parents a lot on the 3 C's, which comes from Stanley Greenspan's work. He's a famous psychologist in the DC area that talks about the 3 C's, which are basically the building blocks of security. And it's confidence, competence, and connection. And competence is when you know how to do something, you're good at it. But confidence is when you feel good at something, which could be very different. You might be good at it and not feel you're good at it, or the other way around, right? And then connection is when we feel close, which I think that could be close to the activity, like it feels experienced near, like, oh yeah, I get this, I know this. Or it could be close to the setting or the group or a person. And all of us know sometimes that will calm us down. So any of those could be a way in to try to encourage your child to speak up. Like, okay, what do you think it is? Is it because you feel like you don't know it? Maybe you don't know it, or are you having a hard time feeling connected?
Allison, would you recommend a parent uses those exact words to help their child boil it down?
Yeah, I use words like the 3 C's with the kids I work with in my office. If I did that at home, I think they'd probably laugh at me. So I might use kind of more everyday words, like, how can we help you feel more sure? How can we help you feel stronger in your ideas or your knowledge? And how can we help you feel closer? Those are the words I think parents would do better with.
I like that. Thank you.
Sure.
And you also use a strategy called emotion coaching, which kind of goes along with problem solving. Can you tell us a little bit about how that works?
Yeah, so all of the top therapists, whether it's in child therapy, couples therapy, parent work, whatever, rely on emotion coaching. And it sounds complicated, but it's not. Basically, emotion coaching is figuring out the feeling to help, because emotions can either block us or help something flow in terms of a thought or an action, right? And if we don't know what the feeling is, which is oftentimes more obscure than what we're thinking or what we're doing, we have a hard time problem solving. So the Gottmans have a great model, John and Julie Gottman, if you ever wanted to look up theirs, but it's basically everything you've heard, which is identify the feeling, stop, identify the feeling, kind of know what you're feeling in your body, know what you're thinking, if that's important, or what you're doing, if you have to unlock that. If there's a need for that feeling, identify a need and then try it. So for instance, if you're angry and you need to take a break, or if you're sad and you need to like move around to get energy, that you would give yourself that. And if you can't, you could ask for that help. And the last thing is also kind of know what your limits are, know what the situation is calling for, because sometimes we can't do what all our emotions need in that moment. If we're angry, we might just need to wait until we can take a break and go for a run during recess. If we're a kid, for instance, we're not going to be able to go run around in the classroom in that moment. We could kind of breathe and hold it, or ask for a water break from your teacher or whatever. So all of this actually, so people don't have to remember it exactly, is in a handout that'll be sent to you after the webinar. So, but it's basically just know the feeling, give it what it needs, know the situation.
I love those steps, Allison. It makes me think of this webinar I was doing on Tuesday night for Arlington County Public Schools, and it was on procrastination. And the model around procrastination is actually kind of similar in that the first step is to know that you're about to do it. Because you can have all the strategies in the world, but in that moment, if you're unable to say to yourself, wow, okay, I'm about to procrastinate, I'm about to put this off because I don't want to do it. You have to get to that point. It sounds like it's a lot like emotion coaching.
It is. Yeah. And this one author I've read recently, anyone who wants a good book, Mark Brackett of Permission to Feel, he talks about being an emotion scientist. And what I say to kids is emotions are very important data. So we often forget to include them, or whatever, we do what we do with emotions, right? We might avoid them or we go into them too much, but data feels like a more neutral way to think about our emotions, because they can inform the process.
I love that term, emotion scientist. I bet kids like that too.
Yeah, because they like being in charge of themselves. And, many of us have very smart kids. I work with very smart kids. And sometimes being really smart and knowing things doesn't mean we always know how to deal with emotions. Like that comes with development and time and experience.
Allison, what else can kids do to help themselves?
I think there's a lot of different ways. I like to talk to kids about moving strategies, thinking strategies, feeling strategies, and like environment strategies. So, moving strategies is what it is. Basically, sometimes they can move their bodies to deal with an emotion or a problem if it's appropriate. Thinking strategies, or sometimes they can think of rather than what if I'm worried, they can come up with a what now plan. That's an example of a thinking strategy. Or if you have a negative thought, like I'm always going to do awful, figure out what the feeling behind that is that you need. And then, oh, well, I'm learning how to feel better about my work would be a way to kind of shift that. And then sometimes it's just about changing the environment. I know sometimes when I do hard work, I put on music and light a candle and get quiet, and I give myself that sort of extra attention for focus. And I think kids have to learn how to do that for themselves as well.
It kind of makes me think about the kids that, sometimes I think they're afraid to ask for help because they're afraid there could potentially be rejection.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that?
When they're afraid to ask for help?
Well, just the fear of rejection, because ultimately they're afraid they're going to be rejected by their peers if they do it in person, because that's why they often don't want to raise their hand. They look stupid. They think they look dumb in a classroom. But sometimes they don't want to message their teacher because they're afraid the teacher might say, well, you should know this by now, or we already went over this in class. And so they just get stuck.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of ways to deal with that. I think if they're afraid, they probably need some sort of soothing strategy, and kids don't always know how to do that for themselves, especially inside their head. If you think about an adult, how hard that is to do when we're upset about something. I mean, it takes a lot of repetition to learn how to do any new behavior, but especially something that's kind of inside, an inside job versus, you know, an outside thing. I always tell parents, you know, we take kids to soccer practice from the time that they're 3, and they go every week, practice with their parents. And it still takes years before they start becoming, you know, better soccer players. And the same is kind of true when it comes to emotions, especially if we're learning how to deal with harder emotions. It takes repetition and time and encouragement. So a lot of times I think I mean, smart kids sometimes have a harder time with this because they feel like they should know. They should have taken care of this already because they're quite smart and often thinking well beyond their chronological age. And so they don't give themselves a lot of leeway emotionally, that even though, you know, I can think like a 16-year-old, but I'm still only 9 and I don't really know what to do with feeling scared and afraid. So I think just figuring out how your kid needs to be validated. I mean, I have one son where I can validate him logically, but when he's really upset, I shouldn't do it with words, really. I should do it just with my presence. And that's taken me a while to figure that out. So we have to kind of know our kid, try a bunch of different ways. And when they're old enough, you can ask them, how do you like to be responded to when you're upset? Don't do that in the moment. Do it, you know, different, like an, oh, by the way, I was wondering kind of question.
It sounds like that could work for a spouse.
I think not in the moment, though, right?
Not in the moment. Allison, what do you do with the child who just kind of, we talked a little bit about kids that are afraid to speak up, but what about the child who just kind of resists outright? They're like, I'm not going to ask for help. I'm not going to do that, Mom. Leave me alone.
Yeah.
How do you handle just overly resistant students?
Yeah, I think it's really important to look that there's different kinds of saying no. There's one author, and if I can remember their name, they talk about the 3 different kinds of no's. I'm just looking up the author's name, and if I see it, I'll mention it. But they talk about the talkative no. So when kids are so busy saying no, to me, I see that as an opportunity that we can still have a conversation about the no, versus it can be a 2-way conversation. And so I can enter in with, okay, well, tell me more what you think. Okay, what do you feel? And what do you know about the situation? Okay, you know, can I offer an idea here? Is this like, are we having a 2-way conversation here? Or is this 1-way? Or, you know, to see if they can move their way into expressing that more. But then sometimes there's the quiet no, like we have those kids, right, who are basically determined and they're saying no by being silent. And I think those situations require more soft choices and like less of a 2-way conversation, more like a, I wonder this, or I wonder this. And if they react more, it's our cue to get quieter, right? And to pull away from it and let themselves calm down. But then we have kids who are give a heated no, right? And they really need less talking and less emotion at the get-go, like one blip of validating, like I can see you're mad, I'm going to give you space. And then you come back around and give them a choice when they're calm enough to be able to talk. So it's not so easy. It's easier to do with other people's kids than your own. But I think it helps to figure out what kind of no it is. And that really differentiates between, is it reluctance, like I'm just worried and unsure, or is it resistance? I really don't want to do this and I'm resisting with kind of my thoughts. Or is it more like defiance, like there's no way I'm doing this, I'm really angry, and it's more complicated in those instances. So
I know, Allison, you put all these strategies into the handout. So
yes, absolutely.
We'll make sure everybody gets this tomorrow. I put that email template, but probably more importantly, all of Allison's ideas for verbiage, how to talk to your kids. Allison, it makes me think of that book, How to Talk So Kids Will Listen, How to Listen So Kids Will Talk, which I absolutely love. I think as a mom, as a teacher and a tutor, it's probably been one of my favorite books. Is it one that you think could relate to this?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think what that book is, and it's been a long time since I read it, and I read a lot of these types of books, but I think it's trying to emphasize that, well, one, we don't always have to talk to solve problems. As adults, we go right to verbal. It's not always the best strategy. And we have to talk with our kid in mind. I have one of my sons, he's very specific. And if I am not speaking to him in a very specific way, he will let me know. And so I've had to learn, like, oh, okay, let me know exactly what you're thinking and feeling. And then I can parrot some of that back to him to try to join with him.
That makes sense. Thank you, Allison. All right, so let's wrap up because I see that we have lots of questions in the chat. And before we do, I wanted to let you know, if you feel like this type of advocacy in the form of academics would be helpful for your child, I'm more than one of my staff members or I are more than happy to talk to you about our services to discuss how we can help your child. So if you take your phone and you hold the camera up to this QR code, it will show you the website and you can schedule a consult with us. So Allison, before we go to the questions, I just wanted to thank you so much for your time. And I just always love hearing what you say. It helps me to reframe things with the kids I work with and my own family too. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Ann. Thanks for the invite. I enjoy this a lot.
You're welcome. All right, so we're going to go to Q&A, and just a reminder, after the Q&A, you will see a survey pop up in your screen, and if you could be so kind as to complete that survey, it will be really helpful to me to see what you found to be helpful about this webinar. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to answer some of these questions. So let me pull them up here. All right, somebody said, can we get this recorded? And yes, we're going to make sure that she said so my spouse can see it. And yes, we'll make sure that you get this in an email along with the handout we mentioned. All right, let's see. Somebody said, I liked the what now frame instead of what if. And can you talk a little bit more about that, Allison, and why what now instead of what if can be helpful?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a primary intervention that therapists use in cognitive behavioral therapy when they're dealing with anxiety, especially. So, but basically what if is when we're worrying and we're doing that circular worrying, like, what if I fail the test? And what if failing the test causes me not to get into the school I want? And then what if I can't go to the college I want? And it goes on and on and on like that. The what now, I think where this misses is you have to deal with the feelings. But what now is, what can I actually do about it? So, oh, okay. So I know that I'm feeling anxious. What can I do now in this moment to calm down? You know, I can take drink a really cold drink of water. I can, make a list of what, write my teacher about that test that I didn't do well on or whatever. So I think it takes something that feels out of control and perhaps future oriented and makes it more present and also actionable.
Thanks for that, Allison. A common question I get around this topic is really the marriage of perfectionism and anxiety. And we see that a lot in our practice. We have a lot of high achieving kids that are doing fairly well in school, yet there are still some glitches in their way. And often it is perfectionism. And they are very reluctant to ask for help for fear of not feeling smart enough. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship between perfectionism, anxiety, and also asking for help?
Absolutely. I mean, I think some people would say perfectionism is a kind of anxiety manifested in a trait or a repeated behavior. right? That then becomes kind of a normal way of acting. So whether you call it perfectionism or type A, whatever, it becomes, anxiety is super productive until it's not. I mean, I know certainly for me, anxiety has helped me get through a lot of things, when I call it anxiety with a little a. But when it's anxiety with the big A, meaning it's more clinical or more pervasive and more long-term, usually there's a tipping point where it gets in the way of what we're trying to do. So I think perfectionism really is when it becomes kind of a behavioral pattern that we rely on too much, and then we stay stuck in that closed loop of trying to do better and better and better and better. And some of us have learned, that actually backing away from doing more actually sometimes helps us do better. I know that I had instances of that in some of my education where when I took a walk, my paper sorted itself out in my head versus continuing to write. So yeah. And I also think perfectionism has a lot, it's interesting. We see a lot of kids who are perfectionists who also struggle with procrastination. Those things can ping pong back and forth at times. And for a lot of reasons. Sometimes it's kids who have ADD or ADHD and they're quite bright. And so they struggle with knowing what they want to do, but having a hard time getting their engine going or getting focused enough to produce.
Would you say that there's a relationship between ADHD and not learning from prior mistakes or failures? And, can that sometimes lead to kids not willing to break out of their bubble and advocate for themselves?
Yeah, I think there certainly can be. There isn't always. I mean, one thing I've learned from Dr. Lance Clausen, who's a psychiatrist in the area and very well known, is there's so many different types and expressions of ADHD and ADD. There's not just 2 or 3. It's all about how that plays out for a particular kid with their unique intellect and abilities, right? And also how they learn to adapt. And it can be super adaptive in in a good way. And then there's times it can cause, of course, blocks. So yeah, I think that's a great point in the chat, when they can't process their feelings because they're not tracking well their experience, either their experience of thoughts, their experience of actions, or their experience of feeling. Anytime that is not tracked well and processed, then it's hard for us to learn from moment to moment. It's hard to internalize the learning experience.
Allison, Peg asked, some kids are so far removed from what they are feeling, especially very bright kids. Any suggestions on how to help them identify the feeling so that they can move through it more easily? And I'll preface this by saying she is a tutor. She works with lots of kids.
She's a tutor. Oh, yeah, this is good. I think it depends on the age. I mean, it depends, right? But so I guess it would depend on the age and the situation and the child's mind. So if you're a tutor, you probably really know how to evaluate that with kids. I like for kids to get to the point where they're curious, where it's not my idea, but it's their idea about learning about their feelings. So I don't always know what that looks like in tutoring, but for me as a play therapist, sometimes working with young kids, they're not curious about their feeling until it's gotten in the way of them having fun in the play therapy, right? Because they want to do whatever this thing is they're trying to do in therapy. And so then I have a moment to say, hey, do you want to know something that I know that I've learned from other kids? That's another way that I get it in there. Sometimes you want to know what kids have taught me about feelings. So it's not a grown-up saying, this is what I'm going to teach you about your feelings. I wonder if this would work for you. So, and oh, by the way, I wonder, do you want to know what I've learned from other kids? Sometimes I think as a tutor, it would be easy to say, kids have kind of been my teacher too, because I've been doing this for a while. And I think kids like to be respected and honored for their brains and their abilities. So that's a couple different ways to go into it.
Thanks, Allison. Claire asks, do you have a couple of good questions if you suspect your child is anxious but isn't vocalizing it? And she said, I'm thinking of this regarding an 18-year-old.
I was just about to throw out a book, but it's for much younger. A couple good questions. It depends on if the kid's a talker or not. I think sometimes YouTube videos around emotions they have a lot of them out there that are more nonverbal. They're animated cartoons is a great way to get someone that age to be like, oh, what do you think about this? I mean, I think the questions would be, do they feel like they know how to use their feelings in a way that's productive for what they want to get done? Because that's really, I mean, emotions are functional. And we need to know enough about them to have them work for us and not against us. So the question might be, do you feel like you know enough so that you can use it when you need to? And sometimes for certain kids, I say, you don't actually have to talk about your feelings to process them. You can do other things. Like, do you know what to do to address certain feelings? Intense feelings usually need more time and space, but sometimes they need bigger action as a way to process. Whereas smaller ones, sure, maybe you would talk about those more or think about them if you're less talker.
It's making me think of that term you used earlier, emotion scientist.
Right.
It's almost like kids have to be a detective.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Brene Brown just published her very famous book, Atlas of the Heart, which is a beautiful coffee table book. And there she gives kind of new nuanced definitions or 87 different emotions. It's a lot of emotions.
For us.
Yeah.
And also Pete, one of our tutors said, he just commented, perfection is for the gods. It's okay to make a mistake and learn for it. I always offer and learn from it. I always offer this in my tutoring, a safe place to make mistakes. And thanks for sharing that, Peter. I love that.
That's great.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Allison, for being with us today and, you know, for lending your expertise. I so appreciate it. It's always so wonderful to talk to you. So thank you so much. And everyone, look for the handout and we'll make sure that comes to your inbox so you have all the information that Allison spoke about and how to talk to kids. Thanks again, Allison, and have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, Ann. Thanks to everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.